Thank you very much. Those coming and have been here, and I'm just waiting for a few numbers to come in, a few people to join. Um, but this is going to be a really, really fascinating webinar. I say that myself. Basically, we've got Claire, who I hugely admire, and we both probably have got different skills and sets of understanding which complement each other really well to work out the problems that we've got facing workforces. And I think that's where we're going to be heading and emerging some of the science, the neuroscience, the behavioral science that's coming through, which I can talk about, to very much then how does that actually play out in the workplace? What's going on? Why are people behaving as they are? And why have we got this real problem where we kind of feel that there's a lot of anxiety, lack of trust, mental health problems, which is affecting performance? And I think that's where, in the end, we have to understand how we're going to improve performance. But this is not just about well-being, where it's a kind of add-on. This is something which has to be fundamental, and that's where Claire's experience is huge in understanding how do we change leadership, how do we change management skills, how do we change the culture of a place to make it all work, and making people really want to stay and work here. So I'm just going to introduce myself. I'm William Bird. I'm a GP and I'm CEO of Intelligent Health. Roots Health Academy sits in intelligent health, and it is there to provide the best evidence about the health side and the neuroscience side of what is happening in our own bodies and how we behave. How do we work? Why do we work so well sometimes and not the others? How do we make sure that everything we do, eat, sleep, exercise, activity, how do we make sure all of that really does contribute towards us having a really good, great life and a creative, productive, and a life where we're connecting with each other? And a lot of it all comes back to the brain and it all comes back to the science there. And that's what we talk about in Roots Health Academy. So I'm going to hand over now to Claire. And Claire, can you just introduce yourself and perhaps just after you made that introduction, explain what you think are the problems facing companies today?
Mm. Yeah, sure. So I'm Claire, and my experience, sort of the majority of my career, I've worked in learning and development leadership consultancy. So really understanding things from an organizational perspective. For the past sort of latter part of my career, I very much focused on what we can do to upskill, to thinking about ways of working, processes that actually are going to improve our cultures, to be able to create a culture where people are able to perform at their best. And a lot of that stuff links back. For me, especially, I understand from personal experience how our nervous system is responding to the environment around us and to those triggers and activators in the environment. And when we're under pressure, when we're in that survival mode, we are less likely to be collaborative, we're less likely to be innovative, we're less likely to make sensible decisions, we're more likely to be defensive. So the impact of putting people constantly into survival mode has a real degrading impact on people, not only from a physical and mental health perspective, but from a performance perspective. And we've talked about this before, but I often feel that organizations hire all of these incredible people, and that can be from a capability perspective, a diversity perspective, a skills background perspective, and then the culture that is actually then they're placed in is constantly putting people either they don't feel psychologically safe, they feel that pressure in terms of workload challenges, ambiguity, that it's actually putting people into survival mode, which means that they end up performing worse. So it's about understanding what is it that we're doing as organizations to set our people up for success, to be able to perform at their best. And something I was saying to a friend yesterday is I think the sooner that we realize that we are animals and that we respond biologically, and that is sort of imprinted and part of who we are biologically, and try to work with that instead of assuming that we're better than that or that we can think our way out of that or be more intellectual than that, the more we understand that and work with our nervous systems, work with our biological responses, the better we're going to be able to unlock performance and capability in our organizations. And it's about being able to a talk about that in a way to the right people so that you get buy-in from people who perhaps haven't bought into some of this stuff in the past? And also, how do you shift some of the ways in which you might, some of the behaviors that you normalize in your organization and think this isn't always about making sure we've got the right webinar or the right benefits in place. It's about saying every single day, what are the behaviors we normalize and what does that do to our people? And what's that knock-on effect when it comes to their overall performance and their overall sustainability as employees?
Brilliant. And I do love the fact we are animals.
Yeah.
And actually,
And
there
why do we think we're better than that? And
we
it's
do.
like we're all the evidence shows we're not. So let's accept it.
Well, I'm going to go, because I talk about nature sometimes about how we connect to nature. And I think, no, no, actually, we don't connect with nature. We are nature.
Yeah.
We are nature.
Yeah.
So it's,
Yeah.
and, I'll explain just some of it. And what you've been saying there is about all that kind of the stress and how we behave differently. And then when that behavior becomes normalized, it's really then hard to get out of that shift
Hmm.
because you can't see where the problems are because it's all normal now.
Yeah.
And it's only when
Yeah.
someone comes in or you compare it to somewhere else or someone comes in from another company and say, oh, no, this is very different to what I'm used to.
Uh-huh.
So the animal bit, and I will start that. So
Yeah.
apologies, everyone. We are animals. That's what we have to come to terms with.
I think
I,
that's great. It feels like an upgrade to me.
well, if you love dogs and things like
Yeah,
that, look,
yeah.
you're definitely an upgrade. Definitely an upgrade. Um, there are only three things that an animal absolutely has to have, and it pretty much goes to all life. It's feeling safe, because obviously you've got to survive to reproduce to get your species back up again. You've got to feel you belong. That's important to try and get people around you. And obviously for animals, you work better in a pack for most of them. And you need to feel valued. And the value comes for two reasons. First of all, it means as a baby, you get the value as a sibling to make sure your mum gives you the milk. So if you're not valued, then you're gonna die.
Hmm.
And then when you find a mate, you want to be valued to get the best gene pool to get with that.
Right.
So it's
Yeah.
inherent. It's really inherent. These are three real basic things. And when we don't feel safe, we don't feel valued, we don't feel we belong, that's when we start to get the fight and flight, the stress.
Hmm.
You don't need stress. You don't need someone shouting at you to get the stressor. You just need to have an absence of safety. And that's what it's kind of fairly new research. It's called the generalized unsafety theory or something a bit crazy like that. But it basically means that you will go into chronic stress not because of some obvious kind of thing going. It's because you don't feel safe inherently.
Hmm.
And feeling valued and belong are all there because you sometimes trade in safety. If you're a workaholic and you work and work and work to make yourself ill, you clearly haven't listened to the safety bit, but you've really wanted to felt valued. So you
Hmm.
traded
I
in
get it.
safety for being valued. And again, belonging, you might go with the wrong crowd or the wrong partner because you want to belong, but you sacrifice the safety bit in order to have
Okay.
belong because it's so
Yeah.
amazing. And then in a company, it's simple. That's all you have to do. And very quickly, just on the what happens if you don't, with chronic stress, there's another new bit of research coming out, which is, I think, going to fundamentally change things. It means that we've got a fixed amount of energy in our body, and all life does, not just humans. And when we become chronically stressed, we're using up about an extra, we don't quite know how much, but probably an
Mm.
extra 20 to 30% of extra energy is being used up. Now, unfortunately, you can't just eat more to replace that energy. It has to come from somewhere else. And it comes from our gut digestion, which is why we get irritable bowel and problems like that. It comes from our muscle. So you actually start to feel harder to work and
Hmm.
harder to do things because your body's now having to nick the energy from other places. But the real important one is it takes it from the prefrontal cortex, which is where we do all our reasonable thinking. Therefore, when you're under chronic stress, you cannot focus as great because you haven't got the brain function anymore. It's being borrowed, that energy, to deal
Mm.
with the heart rate and the muscles and the shaking and the other things.
Yeah.
So this safety value and belonging going to chronic stress which then borrows the energy from other parts of the body, making you feel tired because it's trying to slow you down, making you feel not concentrating. And then, of course, we can probably talk about it later. Our behaviors change and our
Yeah.
emotions change, and that goes further downstream. But I think this original thing, going back to being an animal, we are no different from any other species. We used to think you could add more calories and that would make up the thing. we can't. All those calories you take when you're chronically sick go into fat. They don't get burned off, unfortunately.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
we put on weight very.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, so I think that's some of the fits in the beginning part of what you were saying, is that it's that psychological safety, it's that normal thing. How do we get people, and how do you think in a company you can get people to feel safe and valued and that they belong?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's I think there's the first element is an awareness piece that those things actually matter when it comes to performance. So helping people to understand the link when it comes to performance. And we talk a lot more about psychological safety now, but Google Project Aristotle, which was back in 2012, which looked at high performing teams and looking at what drives performance in teams. They studied about 180 different teams over a 2 year period, and they found that psychological safety was the number one driver of performance in teams. So if you want your team to be selling more, if you want your team to be better with customer service, if you want them to be more innovative, you want them to be outperforming competitors, then you need to make sure that you're building psychological safety into your team, that you're prioritizing that. And it's about being able to understand that link that I think a lot of more senior people, exec teams, often say, well, that just feels like something that's a bit more people related. And actually, right now, my main objective is to drive market share, or it is to drive sales. And you say, yes, but this will help drive that, and understanding that link. And then also understanding the difference between what does a person, and we know that a bit of stress can be helpful, right? That bit of adrenaline before you go on stage, or to get a project done, and having that acute stress. But the difference between being someone who is chronically stressed versus not chronically stressed, actually the impact that that has in terms of making mistakes. So you're talking about the energy that it takes up just physically being in a chronic state of stress. But then I also think about the time and energy that it takes up when everyone is stressed. You fall out more, so you spend more time having to do conflict resolution and dealing with that. You make more mistakes, or you hide those mistakes, and then they become massive, big issues and mistakes that have to be dealt with, where they're impacting clients, they're impacting outputs, rather than it being someone saying, actually, I made a mistake here. Can you help me? And you dealing with it that way. You're less likely to trust each other. So you're less likely to collaborate, because when you're in survival, you're thinking, oh God, trust no one, everyone for themselves. Your amygdala is much more in charge in your brain. So you see everything as a problem, rather than saying, okay, well, let's pragmatically move through this. You think that's a problem, I'm overwhelmed, I'm stressed, versus your prefrontal cortex being able to say, we've done this before, we know what we can do, and working through it in a more effective way. So not only, and as you said, you're not sure exactly of the percentage, but say, you're talking about 20-30% of energy in your body is going towards stress. I don't have the statistics, but I the amount of time that I think is wasted when you are as a team are stressed all the time, because nobody is um, nobody is giving generosity to each other. You assume everyone else, any short email you think, oh my God, da, 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 now they're out to get me. Now I'm annoyed at them, and I'm going to spend 15 minutes being annoyed at that. And then I'm going to send a rude email back, and then they're going to be annoyed at me. And it's like the inefficiency of everyone being in survival mode for a business is massive too. And actually thinking about what are you able to do to think about some of those elements, so that you can bring everybody's nervous system down a bit more, so that we're able to then be able to interact and perform and work with each other in a way that is going to be more efficient as well. And you talked about safety, belonging, and value. And I think it can be as simple, if you're thinking about your team or your organization, is starting with almost a diagnostic of going, how safe do people feel? What are some of the things that we do to help people feel safe? And thinking about what are the things that make people feel unsafe? And that can be things like ambiguity, like toxic leadership, conflict. So thinking, what are some of the things that help people feel these three things: safety, belonging, and value? And what are some of the things that are going to contradict that? And where are we at an organization when it comes to this? Because often you think something like, oh, um, our comms strategy, oh, that can't really impact how people feel, whether they feel safe or not. But of course it does, because if you're not communicating things in a transparent way or a clear, helpful way, then people feel ambiguity. They don't know where they stand, and that's automatically going to make people feel less safe.
And actually, that aspect of trust and people holding things to themselves, of all that
Yeah,
time wasted, but all that creative energy that isn't allowed to develop because
yeah.
everyone's holding it to themselves. So, one of the things that happens when you have chronic stress, and I'm going to answer this as well because Debbie has put a question in there. Thank you for that. Is it just a lot of acute stress or is there chronic stress? What's the difference? And I'm going to explain that. And one of the things you can tell the difference is that when you've got chronic stress, you produce lots of cortisol. Whereas when you've got acute stress, it's more adrenaline and noradrenaline. So with the cortisol, it pushes away oxytocin. And oxytocin is your trust and love hormone, as people probably know.
Uh, yeah.
So as cortisol goes up, oxytocin goes down. It's a complete mirror, and the other way around.
Mhm.
When cortisol goes down, oxytocin goes up.
I
So one
guess
of
you
the
have to feel safe to feel love, right?
you do.
Love and safety are very, yeah,
Absolutely
connected.
together. And as you say, if you don't feel safe, you're on vigilance. So you don't trust anyone. And that's survival, a very, very
Mm,
clever and very, very effective survival mechanism where you are now making sure that there's no kind of traitor in that building.
mm.
There's no fear or threat or anything. So you stop trusting. That's because your oxytocin's dropped. So to answer that question, acute stress doesn't affect your ability to trust other people. Yes,
Okay.
your heart rate's going up and you feel you feel anxious and you feel energized, etc. Whereas with chronic stress, your heart rate's going up, you're feeling anxious, but you actually don't feel energized. You're feeling really tired. And they call it wired
Mm,
but tired. You're wired, but you're absolutely exhausted. So if you want to know whether you've got acute stress, which is good, and that's dynamic and can help, are you trusting everyone around you? Are your relationships starting to suffer? Are you feeling tired all the time? Does it really hard work going to the gym or going for a run? That means you're in chronic stress.
mm.
But if you're in acute stress, sometimes a run is the best thing in the world that you want to do. And
Yeah.
actually, you're quite looking forward to it, but you just feel anxious about it. And the other one is that Sunday afternoon. I know our work is all over the place, but Sunday evening, Sunday afternoon, if you're feeling you're dreading work, there's clearly a problem which has gone all the way through your life because that
Mm,
is now affecting you 24/7. Whereas the acute stress tends to be much more workplace related at the time, and not so problem. So it is a really important differentiation because we're not saying that all stress is bad. You have to have that a bit of underlying stress all the time to motivate you, feel good, but you feel good. That's the difference. Chronic
mm.
stress, you feel awful. You really,
Yeah.
you just don't sleep properly. Your relationships go. You don't trust people anymore. You feel tired all the time. You start comfort eating loads. You start to not go to the gym. And all of that is because your brain is trying to save the energy. So going to the gym is a big waste of money, is a big waste of money, big waste of energy as far as the brain's saying. So it's saying, why am I getting you to go to the gym? We need that energy, thanks very much, because it's all being used for fight and flight. So it
Yeah.
puts it in. Tiredness, brilliant way of saving energy because you don't do anything. So all of these things are the brain trying to help you to deal with it. But of course, we take it as negatives and take supplements and start taking caffeine
Mm.
and start taking all the things to pep us up a bit. What we really need to do is understand why we're chronically stressed.
Yeah. Yeah. And as we talking about like high performers and that difference in terms of pushing through that stress, right? Often when it leads to people getting experiencing things like burnout, it's because of that mindset of I need to do better, I need to do more, I need to push through. So often people who are your best performers, who are more likely to be those shining stars, are the people who are much higher risk of burnout. Um, because of a kind of a natural mindset, a natural difference in mindset. How do you think that works from a biological perspective?
So I think the burnout is people always say that they had the signs, but they ignored them.
Oh yeah, for years, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I think, we've all been there to some extent. Some people have gone to the extreme and had a horrible burnout and it's been
Mm,
disastrous and it takes ages to come back because you need that recovery. But a lot of people, I think, get quite close to it and maybe actually just pull away, perhaps without realizing it. But I
hmm.
think, though, first of all, you can see it in other people probably quicker than other people can see it in themselves. So I think
Yeah,
that's one of the cultural things in a company and a relationship at home as well. That when you start to see that, of course, that person's very defensive and absolutely not going to take any advice from anyone. But it's really helpful just to notice they're more irritable, they're tired, they're making perhaps a few mistakes, but they're working even harder than they ever did
yeah,
because it's taking more
yeah,
effort to do the same amount of work.
yeah.
Mm. The irritability, the fact that often the exercise and the diet and the look, they are all being struggled. So they're saying they're not doing any of those things. And they stop doing all the things that they enjoy. They stop having any downtime because
Mm,
you're constantly wired and you can't stop doing it because you're having to work harder to achieve the same amount.
yeah,
And it's
yeah.
a horrible feeling.
Yeah. And I've definitely, I mean, I get very burnt out. You know, I'm neurodivergent. I definitely have a real nothing is ever enough mindset. And I definitely push through a lot and ignore a lot of stuff and trying to get better at that. But I feel like I've also worked in lots of organizations where that attitude is glorified. You know, it actually you're a great team player, you work really hard. I remember working for a certain organization where they would we all self-identified as anxious overachievers. We're all anxious overachievers here. And that's almost like this blanket. Well, then we all work ourselves into the ground and we're always really anxious and we're doing more than we should. But that's what we're like, and we all, actually that's sort of a badge of honor, versus having a culture that is more likely to normalize and more likely to reward or praise people saying, I need to step back in this moment, or I need to think about this in a more sustainable way, rather than constantly working at a level that even when your outputs are worse, you're still just grinding and grinding until you fall off a cliff, right? And then you can't perform at all. And there's definitely something to be done in terms of that behavioral, cultural, what is praised and recognized and rewarded in your organization. Because if you say, we want to support people and we don't want people to burn out and we care about your sustainability, but actually the people that behave in a way that is completely contradictory to what we're saying versus what we're actually seeing and rewarding means that people you can have the most wonderful policies, you can have these great values on the wall, but if day to day the behaviors that are normalized and the behaviors that are rewarded are in contradiction to that, then people they know what the reality is and what's expected of them to get ahead in an organization.
So, Claire, you go to a lot of companies and you see what's going on there. I think there's still a big problem in people seeing that actually those anxious high achiever workplaces actually achieve really well.
Yeah.
And I don't think many managers or senior management directors or board members would believe you. I'm not saying all, because I think some do, would believe you saying actually, if you removed that and actually made people a little bit more kind of able to rest, take time out, etc., your productivity would go up. I honestly think they'll say no, because I don't want those kind of people. I want people who are going to be the overachievers. And yes, we might have a bit of, a few disappearing, but I'll just replace them with new people.
Yeah.
How do you get over that kind of mindset? And where's the evidence that you can give them that will show that actually, no, it's not all about, that doesn't work.
I and I think one of the tough things there is it's likely that those people are overachievers or have that same mindset themselves, right? And that's why they've got to that position in that organization. And then you have things like affinity bias, where people are then attracted to other people with similar characteristics to them. So then it's like, well, I'm going to reward you because you behave in a similar way to me. So it is not an easy, it's not an easy shift. I think it is about helping people, but I also do think I have noticed, especially post-COVID, is that there has been a shift towards people going, what am I doing with my life? Is this is this how I want to live my life? Where I am just working constantly, not necessarily spending much time with my family, and is this really worth it? Versus like when you look at some of the statistics, so many people are much more want flexibility in their work than they want a higher salary. It's like actually those things become more important, more valuable to people. So you have a couple of things when it comes to convincing people. It's about how do you link it to stuff that really matters, and usually the thing that really matters is money for an organization. And I understand that businesses, they are designed to hit certain targets, to hit certain business goals. So it's thinking about what is some of the evidence? And there is lots of studies, and we can share some of those in terms of what is the evidence that this actually then has better outputs, um, like reducing mistakes, increasing collaboration, increasing innovation. And there's a study as well that said that one rude comment from a senior member of staff can impact someone's performance by 50%. So by creating an environment where people feel unsafe, they feel under stress, their performance is nosediving. So when you actually link those two things together and think about, well, how do we want to improve this? Versus thinking we can carry on working like this, but the cost of churn, the cost of attrition, the cost of lost people in our business, and also not necessarily attracting that talent as well when there are lots of employees and people out there that are actually looking for a different style of life now, more flexibility, more opportunity to have that work-life balance. Um, it's understanding what we are doing isn't necessarily working because is it? If a business says to me, "Well, we're hitting all of our targets, and we've got our retention scores and everything's fine," then cool, good on you. Go forth and do that. But most people have a problem, whether that is we cannot retain staff, or we've got really high sickness, or we're not hitting the targets we used to. There is often an issue that someone is addressing, and it's about being able to understand, well, it's not what is it and what isn't it, and what are some of the things that actually we're doing to our people that we might be able to fix, because there so many times it's going, okay, well, let's alleviate the symptoms. Let's give people tools to be able to deal with this, to alleviate these symptoms, to take the edge off. But if you're constantly taking the edge off, you're never actually looking at the underlying cause. You're not thinking about what's the root cause underneath this and thinking, could it be us? Because maybe you're spending hundreds and thousands of pounds. Sometimes in big organizations, people are spending 100K on an app, or a membership to something, and then the uptake is really low. People aren't using it that much, when there might be things that with a bit more awareness and a bit more willingness for people to be flexible and to shift their behaviors, you could make a much bigger impact for a lot less money. It's just people being willing to buy into that importance and be able to make those behavioral changes.
I think it's affinity bias is really interesting.
Mm.
And I think there's also, and I don't think you can put too much on the generational changes, but I think there is definitely a contribution to that, that the Gen Z, I hear, are now much more interested in the health and the values of the health in a company. So you're going to attract the best staff if of the younger
Yeah,
staff, if you have
yeah,
that as an important, not just a little kind of tick box well-being program where you've got the fruit in the bowl and
yeah,
everything,
yeah,
but fundamental shift on the people feeling safe in that place.
Yeah. And I always think of it like money can't buy, right? Because I have worked for organizations, and I often think these are the benefits that I have. And what of those are sort of irreplaceable? And most of them aren't, right? Okay, I've got access to gym pass, or I've got access to headspace, great things, like absolutely no shade to those things, but when I think about it, I'm like, okay, well, if I left this organization, I could buy my own headspace, or I could buy my own gym pass. But oh my God, my boss makes me feel amazing. She helps me see some of the things that I thought of as weaknesses as strengths. I feel like my confidence has really bloomed. I feel I've been able to get involved in things that I would have never got involved in before. Or I work for an organization that I'm so aligned to the purpose, that it makes me feel that I'm doing something that matters. Like that stuff is a lot harder than
Yeah.
it's much harder to transfer than a like benefits package. And whilst that stuff is important, that cannot be your only selling point. It's like, what does it feel like to work here? Every day when I show up, how does it feel? And most of that is the immediate people that you're working near, right? It's your manager so much of the time. And the statistics are really clear, and often people leave managers rather than they leave organizations, which I once said to a manager in as I was resigning. He was like, hold on. I was like, I apologize. I didn't mean to sound that so rude. But you do, it's those close relationships, isn't it? Rather than, oh, well, we've got this wonderful policy on this, or the employee handbook is great to read. Well, what am I experiencing day to day, and how does my manager or the people immediately around me make me feel? And what can I do? And how do and what is that money can't buy feeling of working in an organization? And how much is that taking from me day to day? Am I able to work in a way that I don't feel that I'm drained of my energy because I'm in survival mode all the time, and I can do my best work because I'm not in survival mode all the time?
Yeah, in fact, Ellen's put in there highlighting to these leaders that the costs of sickness, absence, agency cover, and recruitment are way higher than reducing the pressure for individuals to enable them
I
to do
know, and
better.
I find it funny that we don't. Is it because the recruitment are like, because often you've got two different budgets, right? And you've got like your capex and your opex. And I know I used to head up a team of about 40 ops people, so I would work quite closely with the head of finance. And it's almost like one-off costs are easier to, oh well, a recruitment cost you can kind of, there are one-offs versus the costs of things that you're doing more regularly. But it's still all money, and it's still all coming out of the bank. And it's like, actually you lose this person to long-term sick, or they're still there but they're just not performing at the
Yeah,
level they were
yeah.
before, which is often the case. um, the cost of that is massive, and it's putting those dots together and saying, this isn't about adding a few nice to have so that people feel happier to work here. This is about making sure that the culture we have created allows the people that we have put in this organization to be able to do their best. And the knock-on effect of that is they will be happier to work here, which is lovely. But the main goal here is about creating an environment where people are able to perform at their best. And that's a much, much stronger sell to a CFO or a CEO, because that's their priority.
And sometimes they're invisible benefits you don't see, like creativity increases. Well, it's very hard to measure creativity. It's very hard to measure
Yeah.
ideas, but it's only when you notice that things have changed, you realize that people are now willing to share their ideas because
Yeah.
before then they didn't trust anyone. They thought their manager might nick it or someone else might
Yeah.
nick it, and therefore they wouldn't get any value for it. And so what was the point of saying things? But so there are lots of hidden things that start to kind of come up to show how the company will perform better in a much broader context, simply than just people, not in their absence from work. The thing I wanted to also add, and it wouldn't be right to have a conversation without bringing AI into it, but
Hmm.
a lot of the companies who are now more threatened by AI, so that's legal, accounting, some of the data analysts and stuff like that, are all saying now, actually the level field, the playing field is going to be level because everyone's going to have access to this most amazing way of delivering content and knowledge. The
Mm.
differential in the companies is not going to be knowledge anymore. It's going to be the way you look after your staff.
Yeah.
So if AI comes in and it seems threatening, it may be threatening to it, but you're, as a company, to put these factors inside to make sure that you're the best place to work for, you are going to perform the best, you've got ideas, all the things that AI can't do, you will perform better, you will survive. And so it's now even more
Yeah.
important than it was before because
Yeah.
it's a differential. It's going to really make a difference to the companies that are going to do well and the companies that are not, because
Yeah.
everything else has been leveled out a lot more.
Yeah. And and I think in a world where tech changes so quickly as well, it's really important. Psychological safety is really, really important because the most senior people, the most experienced people, the people with the longest tenure aren't the people who necessarily have the best ideas or have the best insight into what needs to be done as an organization. So you need someone, a young whippersnapper, to say, no one uses that platform anymore. It's a waste of time. Or actually, there is new tech coming that means that what we're doing right now is going to be obsolete in 4 weeks. And if people don't feel safe enough to raise that stuff, to talk about that stuff, you can't stay ahead of the incredible speed at which we innovate and develop in terms of tech because those people are saying, well, I'm never listened to, or I never get heard, or it is held against me, and so therefore I won't bother saying it, and then you end up being a company that's just getting left behind. So you cannot assume that experience, seniority, or tenure equals knowing what's the best thing to do, especially now, where I can't even get my head around what is possible in the world of AI or the world of tech.
Yeah.
And nor would I want to. I will rely on someone who can tell me what I need to know. But I'm sure lots of people in more senior positions can't do that either. So you need to be able to create an environment where people who are more um, passionate, more interested, more experienced in that feel safe enough to say, you are heading for a big problem, or there's a better way of doing this, there's a new way of doing this. And that comes through creating psychological safety.
It's extraordinary how long it took to get that, as you say, from a Google that first study that was done. It showed it was the
Yeah,
number one thing.
yeah.
Just to say to people, please put any more questions in the question.
I can see one that's come through as well, which I think is probably for you. It says, I feel my stress has led to inflammation in my body, something that I have recognized in more recent years that I have been experiencing it for many years. What additional things can I do to eradicate it apart from recognizing when I'm stressed early on and slowly break down the accumulation? This is the tension I have in my shoulders and autoimmune conditions. So that's something I can very much relate to, is that sort of that constant toll and long-term toll that chronic stress puts on my body.
uh,
So I'd love to
that
hear
is
your
best.
answer. Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely the best way of saying it. It is a long-term toll. You know,
Mm.
your body is now putting all its effort into stress rather than repair of your mechanism. All your housekeeping doesn't get done. So it's like a
Mm.
company which is got a cash flow problem, and therefore it takes all the money away from servicing machines to looking after
Uh-huh.
staff and doing that. Now you can do that for a while to get through an acute cash flow problem, but when that is done month after month, year after year, the machines break down, the people leave, and that company will eventually go down. And the same with our body. You can put up with stress for a little while, but eventually you have to pay it all back to get that repair done again in the body. And inflammation is a really fascinating one. So all of this comes down to the little energy things that we've got with mitochondria in our cells, and they're all kind of pumping away, keeping the energy going out. What that does, it creates when it's really not working very well, it almost as though that cell is damaged, and therefore you get an immune system that's activated. So as you're creating that toil, your immune system is starting to become much more activated to try and deal with that, of cells that are becoming sick, of cells that are looking more dangerous. So once your immune system gets hyperactive, it starts to attack your own body, and that's where you start to feel problems. That's why pain goes up. Pain is a very
Mm.
direct effect on inflammation. It's by fibromyalgia for people who've got that. Inflammation in the brain gives you bipolar, it gives you depression, it gives you schizophrenia even. So we're starting to see that inflammation is absolutely the biggest problem. It comes down to this problem of the chronic stress, but also overeating, not exercising. They both contribute to inflammation. So my advice to you is yes, recognizing that stress, wired but tired. If you're feeling tired all the time, it's your body saying that you're not in balance. You're basically got too much of that stress, and therefore the body's shutting down to try and save as much energy as possible. For physical activity, you won't feel like doing it, but you have to, and you have to do it gently. Start off with the walks, but just get out there. Try and get your 30 minutes. If you can go for a run or gym, and that's fine. But when you've got chronic inflammation, sometimes that is really uncomfortable. So do it gently, build it up. And eating is the mild ketotic diet is by far the best way of getting rid of inflammation. So you just hold back on the carbs a bit more. You have that bit more of a gap between eating at evening and then having in the morning. So you've got time for clearing out the inflammation in the brain. And
So
actually,
eat an earlier dinner. Is that what
eat
you
earlier
mean? Yeah.
dinner and then much later. And then I used to be a very kind of skeptic about this fast for 48 hours. But the evidence is really strong that inflammation of the brain, which is obviously the leader for depression, bipolar, anxiety, and all of those things, if you do your fast for 48 hours of just drinking, 24 hours is fine. You actually do clear out a lot of that inflammation. So it's the carbohydrate, constant carbohydrate, particularly late night snacks that causes the problems of inflammation. And you will notice such a difference in your brain power when you go to a mild ketotic diet. It's not your heavy, you've got to have your carbs, you've got to have your balance. But do that, do the physical activity. Sleep is the other thing, clearly a problem for a lot of people, but that obviously is taking away the chronic inflammation. And then there are a few other things of keeping hydrated, which people forget about. That can also have a big effect. And then trying to avoid, and this is maybe hard for those of you living in bad cities, air pollution and smoking clearly. And alcohol, fine by a small amount, heavily, you get inflammation of the liver, which goes around the body. So there's definitely other ways you can do it. You'll kind of hear all that and think, oh, I've heard all this before. You eat well, you sleep well, you exercise more. But now you know why that's so important. It perhaps gives a little bit more
Mm.
incentive to do it.
Yeah, yeah, great. Okay. There's another question here, which is, as a person in a middle management role, how would you recommend I continue to raise the importance of psychological safety to see the benefit of everything you've just talked about and help the team to feel safer than they do now? So I think there's a couple of elements there. We can share some of the research, which can always be helpful when you're kind of wanting to talk and help people to understand the links between psychological safety and performance. But I also think it's about small changes, thinking about what are some of the small things you can do that help build psychological safety. And a couple that I think I'm aware of time, but I'll just share a couple that I think are really useful. Psychological safety is allowing one of the big parts of psychological safety is allowing space for people to disagree with you. So that is not just saying, oh, does anyone agree? Does anyone have any issues? Okay, fine, let's move on. It's almost giving people a really clear space. So saying, let's be devil's advocate here. What might be wrong with this situation? What might be a problem? You know, if you were going to think of the pros and cons, what would you do? And what would you think of as the pros? What would you think of the cons? So you're really creating space in team meetings, in one-to-one discussions, in group conversations to make sure that there is space for people to know that it's safe for them to say, I actually disagree. I think there's more we could do, or there's something that we could do different, or this doesn't work for me, or this has an impact on me. And then the second one I would suggest, there are many more, and I can actually share a bit of a list of sort of my top favorite ones. But the second one I would suggest is making sure that you are being inclusive in allowing people to feedback to you. We often just go, anyone got any questions? Okay, no one put their hand up. Fine, we're done. You actually want to give people so many different ways to be able to feedback. We have different neurotypes, we have different levels of confidence, we have different people who need time to process. So having people making it okay for people to feedback in the chat function, giving people an anonymous survey to be able to fill in later, perhaps anonymous Slido links, lots of different things that you can do to make sure that you have so many different platforms that people can feed back on, because that allows people to feel more engaged, like there's not only just one way to feedback and give comments. It also means that you are making sure that you are inclusive of all those different types of brains, and that's going to be really helpful for you as a team, because you're going to get all of that capability, all of that skill, all of that knowledge that I'd say most people in typical organization structures miss, because we only ever hear the people who are confident to, in a meeting, go, I've got something to say. And there, probably 90% of people don't feel like they want to do that, or their brains don't work in that way. So it's giving people that opportunity to be able to do that. But I will also share, I've got a list of things that are really practical things. It doesn't need to be like, we need to do more with psychological safety. Okay, what does that look like? It's like, here are 6 things as a leader you can do that you can wrap into your day-to-day processes that will naturally start to increase psychological safety. And that feels like a more digestible thing to start
Yeah.
with versus it feeling like this big strategic priority.
And I think, Claire, something you taught me as well is that vulnerability doesn't equal weakness. And
No,
people,
no.
leaders, often feel that if they become vulnerable, which is how you create psychological safety, it means they look weak. And it's the opposite, isn't it?
No, it helps people trust you more, because we don't trust polished poker faces. We trust real people. And so if you are vulnerable in a way that feels comfortable for you as a leader, people are going to feel safer to feel vulnerable with you too.
Claire, thank you so much. You've been fantastic, and your knowledge and experience is unbelievable in the
Oh,
organizations
thank
you
you for
work in.
having me.
So look,
It's great.
we're going to be some more. We're going to have more of these every 6 weeks. We'll have another one. So do keep in touch with us. The Roots Health Academy. Get in touch. We can both Claire and I can get back to you on anything that you're particularly wanting to follow up. And we obviously have got our kind of shared experience really works well, and we've got other experts as well who can help on filling some of the gaps there. But thanks so much for staying with us for the full time for your questions, and look forward to
Thank you.
seeing you in about 6 weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you.